because we were very close to my grandparents. That's where we were all born. And we have collections of Grandpa Borlaug. Like Norm always said, Grandpa was a rebel, he said. He just believed in something and he would not give up. If he believed in it, he was just going to carry through it, and that's just the way Norm was. Grandma was after their noon meal, when she'd get her dishes done, she'd always take her Bible and go in the bedroom. And so I think that's where we got the part about our faith and religion, and it was very important to us.
Norm lived there till I believe he was 9 years old when they built the barn and the house over there at where the Borlaug place of Norman's boyhood home is now. And so that he must have lived quite a while in that little house there. There would have been Grandpa and Grandma and Oscar and
Norm?
Norm and Henry and Clara.
Oh.
And probably Palma was in there too. Yeah, Palma would have been in there and Charlotte would have been in there. They all would have been around in that little house.
And he was just a common, ordinary guy, and it shows that just one simple person that aged out in a little 105 acres farm or whatever it was could turn out to be such a help to the whole world.
Oh yeah, he had a good
Didn't
time.
he?
Yeah.
Kind of that dry wit or something.
Well, did he pull your pigtails when you were little and tease you as a little girl?
Oh yeah. And it was during the Depression times, and of course, we didn't have toys or anything. We had to make our own fun. And Norm, I remember, we had a little creek going through our farm, and in the wintertime, we'd take a tin can, I remember, and go over on the ice and knock that thing and think we were playing hockey. They got their good work habits from both Mom and Dad. They were hard workers. They were both good Christians. That was very important to our family. Everybody that's born into this world has a right to have a good education. He was all for education. And that's why we have the schoolhouse down there on the Borlaug farm. Because Norm went to all of his 8 years out there with one teacher.
So Charlotte, did you have to walk to school too then, all those years?
Oh yes, we did. And I can remember, they take us, in this winter time, they take us in the bobsled. We'd like to ride on the runners, and that wasn't very sensible because it was kind of dangerous. But of course we weren't scared. But we walked in a lot of snow. I remember one time we got stuck in the snow so deep that we had gallon pails for dinner pails, and we had to take the cover off this gallon pail and scoop the snow out to get me out. Because Norm was the oldest one of the first cousins, and he could see that Norm had a lot of energy and drive, and he thought he should, have a chance to go to college or use some of this nervous energy he had.
That's kind of different. He's the only boy. I mean, normally you quit school at 8th grade or even younger, and farm, stay in the family farm and help your mom and dad and your grandma and grandpa.
Well, see, we had such a small farm.
Oh.
It was only like 106 acres or something. It wasn't big enough for both of them. And for two families to make a living, but he wanted to do something with agriculture because he could see all the hunger there was in the world. But I do remember that he had a scientific mind. He was always curious about everything. Paul and I, my sister and I, felt that someday he would really accomplish something because he was so intense about learning. And he used to tell the nieces and nephews, if you can't figure it out one way, don't ever give up. Be severe and work and try it another way. And don't ever give up, he said. And I could just hear Norm saying that. And Harry Schroeder influenced him a lot.
The agriculture teacher, he taught him, but he's the one that made these different plots of grain ahead of his time too. And he showed how fertilizer would help and so on and so forth. He was a good teacher. I had him for general science.
Well, I can remember when we had a lot of bogs in our farm, and Norm was always so curious, wondered why some places the grass would be so much taller and grow so much better. And he figured it out that it was fertilizer. It was these cow paws that were make them grow. And that's when they got started using nutrients, and he was interested in sports of any kind. I think when he was growing up, he was going to be a baseball player. But every Sunday we had to go down to they had teams, in the neighborhood, and they'd have tournaments, and the whole community would go out and watch.
But according to this book, Bartelma had a big influence on Norm. He got him wrestling and told him, get out there and do your best.
Or don't compete, he
Right,
said.
right.
Yeah. And he loved music. He loved to go to dances. And just a common, ordinary guy.
He was also an athlete. He wrestled at, back then, Cresco, and he was an All-American wrestler. He went to the University of Minnesota and continued wrestling. And now he is in the Wrestling Hall of Fame in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And when when my brother and I were young in Mexico, my brother needed some kind of baseball. And they didn't have Little League Baseball in Mexico, so my dad started Little League Baseball in Mexico. Because when my dad was young, he used to sit in the kitchen, and you'll see the radio. He and his dad would listen to the Cubs. You know where the Cubs are, Chicago Cubs?
Yeah.
Well, they'd listen to that. So he decided that he wanted to be a Cubs baseball player. He never made that, and even at the end, he still wished that he had been a baseball player. And so he got to throw out a pitch towards the end of his life at the Cubs game.
George Chaplin, I think, had more of an influence on Norman than anybody else, because George loaded him up in the car and hauled him up to Minnesota, and that's why Minnesota got a hold of Norman instead of him going to Iowa. But George was quite a gentleman. I remember George quite well. He would always talk about Norman and the escapades they used to have when they went up to Minnesota there and got their education. They talked about how they worked up at the college. They had to work their way through college because they didn't have any money.
Daddy waited on tables at a sorority house.
Oh no, Margaret stayed home and took care of all the other Norm was for the world. She shared him. She knew that's what he wanted to do. And she was willing to give up everything and just take care of the family. And so Margaret gets a lot of credit too. We just loved her.
Oh, she was an outstanding lady.
Margaret was a wonderful lady. She got along good with all the family. And we enjoyed having Margaret around.
I think some of us have always said she should have won the Nobel Peace Prize instead of Norm, because she put up with Norm. And Daddy does attribute a lot of his success to his wrestling, to learning his discipline, self-discipline, and how he succeeded that way. Bartelma was one of his very favorite people too.
But he was for the underdog. He always wanted to help the underprivileged. That was because he grew up in the Depression years. He could remember seeing people lying on benches with a newspaper over them. That was the only place they had to sleep. And he thought, this is what I want to do if I can do something to help those poor people. Everybody that's born into this world has a right to have a good education. He was all for education.
But I've gotten to meet a lot of these scientists, and it's really interesting to listen to them and see what's going on. And it's just amazing to hear whether they're people from Pakistan or Afghanistan or Latin America or wherever, all the places that he's been and all the people that he's influenced. And he really, I mean, he was just, I think, aside from being a scientist, he was a humanitarian. And that was probably just as strong a suit as his science, because he really cared about the people and what they were going through. And as they said, every child should be given 3 things. And I told these little kids in school that yesterday. The 3 things that every child should be afforded is food, education, and health care. And he was adamant about that. And he said until everybody has food, it doesn't matter what goes on. If people are starving, there's gonna be unrest in the world. When I took him to the doctor and they said he had lymphoma, they'd done a bone marrow thing, and he came back lymphoma, and Daddy just sat there and he was stunned, but he was already starting to get weak at that point. And he said, and we were at some top oncologist, but he knew who Daddy was, because our internist had told him. Anyway, and so Dr. Strauss said, you have this, and Daddy just was quiet for a little bit, and then he said, and I don't know if you've noticed, Daddy's finger was always up when he was talking to people.
Yeah.
He looked at the doctor and he said, I don't know how much time, he said to the doctor, how much time do I have left? And the doctor said, oh, I don't know, you won't die from this, it'll be from something else. I don't know what that meant, but anyway. And so Daddy got his little finger up there and he goes, I'm telling you, I need 5 to 7 years. I have got to have 7 years. I've got stuff in Africa that I've got to do. And the doctor went, okay, Dr. Borlaug, we'll see what we can do. So Daddy was dictating to the oncologist what was going to happen.
And he's already 90 years of age or so.
He was already 93.
Yeah.
And the day, well, we went into the doctor on a Wednesday, and he died on a Saturday. But on that Wednesday, the doctor finally said, we can't give you any more platelets, we can't give you any more blood, we can't do chemo. And so Daddy goes, well, what? And he goes, well, Dr. Borlaug, there's really nothing else we can do. And Daddy couldn't believe it. I mean, Daddy thought he was never going to die.
Right.
I mean, he really thought that this was going to go away and he was just going to be okay. And the last thing he said, and that was Wednesday, and then Friday, some people came to see him, and the last thing he said, he died Friday night, or Saturday night, I don't know. Anyway, the last thing he said was some scientist had come down from Oklahoma State, and he was working, and Daddy had been trying to get this guy to make this little handheld machine that you could take into the fields and measure the nitrogen so that you wouldn't over-fertilize. And it was for the small farmer. And Daddy was a champion for the small farmer, because that's, taking care of your own families. And he said, this young scientist said, what can I talk to your dad about? And I said, go over there and tell him how that's going. And so he was telling Daddy, and the last thing Daddy really said, this was like about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he said, take it to the farmer. And that's where, I don't know if you've seen that quote or not. Yeah, but
Take it to the farm.
yeah, take it to the farmer. And those were the last words he said. I mean, right before he died, and he died at 10 o'clock that night. He was still worried about the small farmer.